At the end of the 20th century, a political scientist named Francis Fukuyama wrote a groundbreaking book called The End of History and the Last Man. This book sparked a discussion all over the world. In this thought-provoking book, Fukuyama looks at history as a process of how societies change over time and makes the case that liberal democracy is the best way to run a country. Fukuyama's trip starts with a look at where his thesis came from intellectually. He looks at the ideas of thinkers like George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Karl Marx, who thought that history moved forward through dialectical processes. Hegel thought that history was heading toward an endpoint where freedom and self-realization would be fully achieved. Fukuyama builds on this idea and says that Hegel's endpoint is reached in liberal democracy. The author then turns his attention to the most important ideas in his case. He says that history is how cultures and their ways of running things changed over time. Fukuyama says that history has a natural direction, going from simple ways of running the government to more complex ones. He says that this progression leads to liberal democracy, which combines political freedom, human rights, and market capitalism. Fukuyama looks at the major ideas and systems of government that have shaped history to show his point. He talks about the mistakes of authoritarian systems like fascism and communism, which, he says, have been shown to be wrong by what happened in the 20th century. He says that these systems failed in the end because they didn't meet the common human need for freedom and recognition. Fukuyama begins his story with a key event, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. This event marked the end of the Cold War, so it was a sign of the fall of communism and the rise of free democracy. Fukuyama says that after communism fell, liberal democracy was the only political system that could work. Fukuyama then looks at the idea of human nature and how it has affected events. He says that all people want to be recognized and treated with respect, which are important parts of who we are. He says that liberal democracy, with its focus on individual rights and involvement in politics, is the best way to meet these basic human needs. The author agrees that liberal democracy could face problems and threats. He understands that the rise of radical Islam is a major threat to liberal ideals and that nationalist and populist movements could also hurt the liberal democratic order. Fukuyama is still hopeful, though, that these problems can be solved with the help of the worldwide appeal of liberal democratic ideas. Fukuyama's whole book is about how the end of history does not mean the end of events or progress. Instead, it means the end of a fight over ideas and the victory of a certain set of ideals. He says that cultures will keep changing, but only within the limits of liberal democracy. Fukuyama ends his case by thinking about what would happen if history came to an end. He says that the end of an ideological battle could lead to a feeling of boredom or the last man phenomenon, in which people are more interested in materialism and the comforts of life. But he also talks about the possibility of a new age of self-realization and the growth of a global community of people. The End of History and the Last Man has a strong and controversial argument that questions common ideas about how history moves forward. Fukuyama's work has started a lot of arguments and conversations about how societies work and how they will work in the future. No matter if you agree or disagree with his results, his ideas continue to change the way we think about history and its possible paths.